These are the times that Gordon Ramsay got super angry on MasterChef. And in this next challenge, Chef Ramsay wasn't only pissed, but also embarrassed. In Season 4, after the red team lost the field challenge, they had to fight to be safe during the pressure test. However, before the contestants revealed what to do, Joe Bastanich explained that only 6 out of the 8 members would take part in the test. But that wasn't the only twist. This time, the judges would pick who would be cooking. On this occasion, contestants Baim Cruz and Jordan Roots were saved. Meanwhile, Luca Monfe, Natasha Kerniak, Christy Basiello, Brie Kozior, Beth Kirby, and Kathy Prieto had to go through the pressure test. And in this episode, during the test, the contestants were given 30 minutes to make some Eggs Benedict. Now, that might sound like a lot of time, but they only had one attempt to make the perfect dish. Who among these chefs do you think would ace this exciting test? Once the test began, each and every one of them faced problems while making it. And by the end of it, only Chrissy and Brie had the best dishes. Luca, Natasha, Beth, and Kathy had the worst ones. And since the judges couldn't pick the worst of the worst, they decided to send all 4 of them to Las Vegas. This was to determine their fate in another set of team and pressure challenges. For the team challenge, the judges paired Luca with Kathy and Beth with Natasha. These pairs were tasked with cooking a stunning burger at Chef Ramsay's burger restaurant. Luca took the lead for the red team, Beth headed the blue team, and Chef Ramsay was the expediter for both of them. The pressure was mounting, and everyone knew that Ramsay hated to see mistakes. The challenge first started off with 60 minutes of prep time. In the red team, Luca suggested using beef as a patty to go with the caramelized onions on top with some added sauce. He thought the cheese wouldn't be necessary, and Kathy, his partner, seemed to agree with whatever he said. She kept nodding all the way and went with his ideas, but in truth, she actually disagreed with him. Meanwhile, in the blue team, Beth came up with an idea of using beef as the patty as well. But she wanted it served with some prosciutto, goat cheese, and some aioli topped with eggs sunny side up. Natasha seemed to hesitate about the eggs, but still went with it. Both Kathy and Natasha were playing their own game. Since they had no say in their dishes, if anything went wrong, they could easily put the blame on their partners Luca and Beth. However, they seemed to forget one crucial point. It was a team challenge, and this meant their decision could backfire. While the prep was going on, both teams struggled to keep up with it. In the blue team, Natasha was having a few problems with the eggs. Beth asked for a better idea, but Natasha wanted to go with Beth's idea as their plan. As both tried to keep up with the eggs, they moved on to dressing the salad. And in the midst of it all, both of them forgot about the dish's main component, the patty. Had Chef Ramsay not reminded them, the blue team had no chance in this competition. And this left Ramsay frustrated. In a stern voice, Chef Ramsay warned them by saying this:
"Someone's going home tonight. At this stage, it's one of you."
The doors were close to being thrown open for the service, and there was only 3 minutes until they did. Both teams were hurrying up with their dishes, but Beth and Natasha still had no idea what to do with the eggs. These 2 contestants were letting their ego get in the way of the challenge. And everyone knows that when there's no teamwork, the challenge is bound to fail. At the very last minute, the ladies decided to scrap the eggs and go with goat cheese arugula. Was this a wise decision? Well, we're about to find out. The burgers from both teams were served simultaneously to the customers. Ultimately, they would have to vote on which one was better. Before we move on to the service, let's take a little look at what the blue team would be serving. As for the red team, they would be serving this. Now, as we said, these burgers were sent out at the same time to everyone. If the team said 2 minutes to the window, it had to be 2 minutes. And if Chef Ramsay needed to hold it back, it would only be for a max of 60 seconds. If they failed to turn it in, the team would start losing votes. Once the service began, both teams had 75 minutes to serve. As tickets poured into the kitchen, viewers got a glimpse of Chef Ramsay's serious demeanor that he's always had on Hell's Kitchen. But would he be less hard on everyone since it was MasterChef? Hell no. Anyway, the red team got off to an early start, and Ramsay had to remind the blue team of the rules by saying,
"Red team's in the window, blue team, 60 seconds from now."
Chef Ramsay was on fire as usual, and the contestants were struggling to keep up.
I'm like talking to myself here.
Both teams were serving burgers at a good pace, but sometime later, the red team struggled with their orders. Chef Ramsay was getting impatient with the wait and started to count down the 60-second hold.
3, 2, 1.
As the time was about to run out, Luca finally walked up with some burgers. Whew, that was close. However, Ramsay spotted something that made him incredibly mad. You won't believe what he saw.
It's still moving. It's that raw.
Since they already ran out of time, there was no chance of refiring them, so the red team lost a point. Chef Ramsay sent them off with a final instruction and said this.
Take that back. Then wake up.
Back in the blue team, Beth and Natasha were having problems preparing the buns. And in the process, they literally charred the hell out of a bun. Chef Ramsay picked it up with a sense of disbelief and said,
You're out of control.
Sorry, Chef.
You're way out of control.
While the kitchen was falling apart, in the dining room, the customers were casting their votes. Joe was tasked with walking around to get the customers' feedback when one of them called him out. One of the patrons said that she was happy with the blue team's burgers, but not so much with the red ones. When Joe tried to find out why, this is what he found.
I think it's undercooked.
It's raw.
Joe walked up with a burger to Chef Ramsay, who couldn't believe how such an undone burger even left the kitchen. He called the team out and gave them their last warning.
Got to stop. Rethink and get a grip.
Imagine coming across a raw burger at Chef Ramsay's restaurant. Now that's just embarrassing. As the challenge continued, Ramsay announced the arrival of VIPs, and take a wild guess who they were.
Welcome.
It's all the other contestants.
Yep, they were none other than the other remaining contestants. To get some fair votes, Chef Ramsay asked both teams to take their aprons off. There would be no bias now, since the votes would only be based on the taste of things. In order to redeem themselves, Luca made a plan to send out burgers as soon as Ramsay called for them. By doing this, the blue team would struggle to catch up and miss the opportunity to get a vote. But would his plan be successful? The pressure at this point was intense.
Next four, how long?
Now! Up now, Chef!
Just as planned, the red team started sending out burgers at a rapid pace, and the blue team struggled to keep up. With the red team firing out orders, the blue team started to crumble, like literally crumble. And Chef Ramsay couldn't believe his eyes.
How can you stand in front of a grill and burn buns?
The buns were almost charred once again, and Chef Ramsay had to say the obvious.
Even if you're blind, you smell their burn. Man!
Luca's plan actually worked, and the blue team failed to serve their last 4 burgers. And if there's one reason why they were leaving, then it had to be the burnt buns. However, Luca rushed to send out the orders. But in his team's haste, were the burgers still good? Now, let me remind you, the judging was completely based on the taste of the burgers and how perfectly they were cooked. The losing team would have to face a head-to-head challenge. And not surprisingly, with the standards that I just told you, with 4 burgers short from the blue team, this was the ultimate result.
It was close, but the blue team won.
Well, it was all about taste, guys, and the blue team nailed it. But this next contestant was so arrogant that he actually dished Chef Ramsay to his face. However, you have to see how Chef Ramsay reacted. I know Mark is gonna remember this for the rest of his life. It was the first day for the top 20 in season 8 of MasterChef. The first challenge of the day was a mystery box challenge. The box had a paper grocery bag that contained ingredients like broccoli, bananas, carrots, ground beef, chicken breast, rice, canned tomatoes, white cheddar cheese, and chocolate. The contestants had 1 hour to cook the judges a dish using the ingredients, with a huge advantage at stake. Once the challenge was over, Chef Ramsay announced that 3 home cooks stood out amongst the top 20. He then called Sam Reif-Passeru, Heather Dombrowski, and Mark Togney to the front. Mark was on cloud 9, believing that he had won the advantage. However, Mark was completely stunned when Chef Ramsay dropped a bomb.
You 3 stood out for all the wrong reasons.
The 3 of them were sent into the wine room, and after that, the judges called the top 3 home cooks one by one. That being Yachicha Holston, Jennifer Williams, and Brian O'Brien. After the judging was over, Chef Ramsay announced Brian as the winner of the first challenge. And because he won the mystery box challenge, Brian was immune from the elimination test. Christina then chose to save Jennifer and Yachicha since they showed great skills. Ramsay then announced that everyone except Sam, Heather, and Mark would be saved since everyone made great dishes in the challenge. The bottom 3 cooks were called back and asked to lay their dishes in front of the judges. And this is what Chef Ramsay thought about them.
Each of these dishes are way off.
None of them had shown the level of skill and technique that the judges were looking for. This trio now had to prove their worth to the judges in the elimination test. After a disastrous failure, who do you think would impress the judges? For the elimination test challenge, they were handed new grocery bags containing the same ingredients used in the mystery box challenge. This time, they had 45 minutes to redo their dishes, either by making a new dish or using the feedback they got to make an improved version of the same dish. As the trio got started with the challenge, the judges hoped that they used their second chance wisely. Heather and Sam looked serious, but Mark on the other hand moved slowly. and this reflected in the level of seriousness he had for the competition.
If you aren't pushing yourself, I'm not interested in having you in this kitchen anymore.
With 30 minutes left, Sam was making meatloaf and decided to go with the same thing he'd made earlier. But instead of just correcting his mistakes, Sam made the same mistake again by not putting the meatloaf in the oven, which takes at least 30 minutes to cook. Chef Ramsay was discouraged since it was the meatloaf that put him in the bottom 3. He then gave Sam a tip: if he wanted to make it perfect this time, it should go in the oven. Meanwhile, Heather was making a new dish, grilled chicken kebabs with broccoli slaw. And Mark decided to redo the pancakes with chocolate chips and a side of baked eggs. When Christina went to his station to check on what he was doing, Mark explained his situation using a football analogy. And this is how Christina reacted.
Then why did you try the flea flicker? So I'm gonna go
What's with all these football analogies?
Mark could get eliminated, but it looks like he was still playing games. His lack of seriousness made the judges think that he didn't care about the competition. With 10 minutes left, Chef Ramsay walked over to Heather's station. Brining the chicken to impart flavors takes 24 hours, and Chef Ramsay was surprised to see Heather trying to do that in 45 minutes. And to keep her chicken from getting super dry and rough, Ramsay offered her a piece of advice and said this:
Brush the chimichurri onto the chicken as you're cooking it.
Heather took the advice and continued working on perfecting the dish. But just as Chef Ramsay was leaving the station, Mark said something disrespectful.
You know what you could do, Heather? Just do what I do and ignore them.
Oh no, he didn't just say that. And to Chef Ramsay too. I know this isn't gonna end well for him. Ramsay was so pissed that he first asked Mark if he thought the competition was a joke. But what he said next left everyone in shock.
Take it serious or take your apron off.
Seriously.
Take it serious or take your apron off.
Mark's comments had left everyone feeling stunned.
What is Mark doing? This is embarrassing.
If his attitude continued to be this awful, he wouldn't last very long on the show. As the time ran out, all 3 contestants were ready with their dishes. Sam was the first to have his dish judged, and the judges felt his dish was better than the previous one. However, the presentation was a mess. Heather was the second person to have her dish judged, and the judges thought it was nice and liked the presentation. Mark was the last one to go, and he presented a chocolate chip pancake with baked eggs, bacon, and cilantro. The eggs just looked ugly, and looking at them, Chef Ramsay asked Mark if he was happy with his work. Mark was just arrogant and said this:
In all aspects of it.
When Ramsay questioned Mark if this was the best breakfast he's ever cooked, he actually agreed that it was. The arrogance pissed Chef Ramsay off, but how was the dish? Take a look at this.
That is tough to look at.
Although the pancakes were cooked nicely, the judges decided to boot Mark from the competition. Because, well, with that kind of attitude, he would upset the entire spirit of the competition. And so, Mark was the first to leave MasterChef Season 8. But in this next challenge, Chef Ramsay lost it when he didn't have enough portions of meat left to feed all of his customers. Why? The home cooks had given it all away. In the 12th season of MasterChef Australia, the contestants from the previous seasons were back to win the title of MasterChef. It's just like Hell's Kitchen Season 17's All-Stars. On the second day, the contestants were given their first team service challenge. They were divided into 2 groups, and each team had to prepare a 3-course meal for 120 guests. The judges revealed 3 ingredients: black garlic, ginger, and potatoes. And each team had to feature one of the ingredients for each course. It was actually Chef Ramsay's team service challenge, so you can imagine how tough he was going to be during this service. The blue team had some whiz in their team, like Reynold Pornomo, Amelia Jackson, and Laura Sherritt. In the green team, Callum Han had to face Chef Ramsay's anger. Callum's lamb looked great, and you won't believe what it was compared to. A foot spa? Yikes. Callum promised to come around and not disappoint the famous chef. As the green team was busy sweating and stressing, Reynold made the challenge look like a breeze. He was operating 7 pieces of equipment in a swirl of liquid nitrogen. With the service pressing on, Chef Ramsay went over to the blue team to check how much pork was left. And he was left frustrated with the team's disappointing reply.
Left, I'm trying to talk to you guys. No one's talking to you. That is it?
Yes.
The blue team still had 9 tables to go, and this drove Chef Ramsay nuts. He gathered the blue team and told them that about 36 people were still waiting for their food. Plus, they didn't have enough pork to serve. They only had 8 portions left, and Chef Ramsay wasn't having it. Ramsay then ordered the blue team to bring up the wasted pork tray, but they didn't have enough. And this left the famous chef really frustrated. He then asked the team if they threw some away, and the team denied it, but they had to look for a solution. With no backup pork, the blue team was in a huge dilemma. And well, Chef Ramsay was appalled.
But you said 16 portion yield.
Yeah.
I said be smart. Trim what off that?
Ben Milbourne said that the reason they didn't have a backup was because they had a plan. Chef Ramsay was already frustrated, so what actually happened? The problem was the portion sizes. They were giving away way too much. But this wasn't acceptable, so this is what Chef Ramsay had to say.
Can we come together as a team and come up with a solution to how we finish this, please?
Of course, they couldn't just go back to the table and say, hey, we gave away way too much, so could I take your plate back? Chef Ramsay wanted an immediate solution, or he'd enlist all the contestants into the elimination test round. And well, this is the idea they came up with.
That can be saved. Down the middle. Trim.
Ben quickly got Reynolds to get the portion they needed for the rest. Thankfully, they quickly got to work and Reynolds did his magic, serving to the rest of the tables.
Last
Let's
eight.
finish it off.
Come on, Blue, we need to lift this up a bit.
Finish strong, let's go.
So these are the times that Chef Ramsay got super angry on MasterChef. Do you remember any other times when Chef Ramsay lost it on MasterChef? Let me know in the comments section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, guys!